everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a little while since I've done a video, but um, I had a little bit of time today, so I figured I would jump on and discuss something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and that's, you hear all the time people say, freedom of speech is not freedom from consequence. And I was wondering, is that true, or, what's the thought on that? So I did a little bit of research, and I've actually got a article right here. I'll bring it up. Let's see. It's by it's a blog by a man named Ben Smart, and it says why freedom of speech versus freedom from consequence doesn't make sense. It says, in recent debates about freedom of speech and censorship, it's often claimed that freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences. You can say what you want, it's argued, but that doesn't protect you from facing the consequences of your actions. And then he quotes from George Takei that says, freedom of speech does not mean you get to say whatever you want without consequences. It simply means the government can't stop you from saying it. And that sounds persuasive on face value, but if you take a closer look, it reveals that it's deeply flawed. And Ben's thought on this is that it makes it literally impossible to have freedom of speech without freedom from consequence. And one of the examples he gives, he says, imagine you are employed at an IT company and your boss doesn't believe in climate change. He says to you, you are free to say whatever you like here, but if you talk about climate change, you'll be fired. A few weeks later, you mention it in passing, and you lose your job. Is your freedom of speech being protected? Of course not. Freedom of speech is not about letting people physically utter words. It's about protecting them from consequences that are imposed in order to control or restrict what can and can't be spoken about. It says, in this scenario, it would be nonsensical to say that your freedom of speech was protected, but you simply weren't protected from the consequences of what you said. He goes on to say, if you're not yet convinced, apply the same logic to freedom of expression or freedom of religion, and you quickly see how it falls apart. Freedom of expression, this is an example, says you can write comic books about whatever you like, but we'll shoot you if you write something that offends us. An example for freedom of religion. You can practice your religion if you like, but just be aware that we'll kill you if you do. Remember, freedom of religion doesn't mean freedom from consequences. That's completely ludicrous. Or, you're free to insult Islam on your blog, but we'll imprison and whip you if you do. That's what we call a textbook violation of freedoms of speech, precisely because it imposed consequences in order to restrict and control what people can and can't say. By definition, freedom of speech must include freedom from consequences. Freedom from all consequences. That's he continues on here. At this point, someone might object, but freedom of speech doesn't protect you from all the consequences of your actions. And yes, that is true. Freedom of speech doesn't protect us from the natural consequences of what we say. For example, if you speak rudely, people won't like you. That's just a natural consequence, and the law doesn't protect you from that. But freedom of speech is about protecting people from the kind of consequences that are imposed in order to restrict, control, or manipulate what people can and can't talk about. It's not talking about natural consequences. It's talking about things like expelling people from a university because of something they said on a private Facebook account. It's enforcing what ideas can and can't be spoken about. In those situations, freedom of speech must mean freedom from consequence. Let's see what we got here. He has examples of, it says, the confusion around this freedom from consequences idea stems from a failure to distinguish between natural consequences of an action and artificial consequences that are imposed with the purpose of restricting or controlling what people say. In the former category, if your speech breaks the code of conduct at your workplace, they have a perfectly legitimate grounds to fire you without violating your freedom of speech. In the latter category, if an employer fires you because they disagree with something you said on some political topic unrelated to your work, they have violated your freedom of speech. So yes, of course, freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from natural consequences, but it intrinsically and categorically must mean freedom from consequences imposed to restrict or penalize people simply for holding and expressing ideas. He also says, now, to be clear, freedom of speech is not an unlimited and unrestricted right. Some kinds of speech are illegal, such as defamation and hate speech. So by all means, if someone is breaking the law by their speech, they must face the consequences. But if you simply disagree with or are offended by what someone says, then denying them a platform or imposing other consequences to punish them is denying their freedom of speech. And then he finishes out by saying you need to ask the right questions, and says when it comes to the debate around censorship, the question is, what kind of speech should be allowed and which should not? What kinds of speech do we want to protect and which do we not? What kinds of speech should be illegal and which should not? These are complicated questions, and I don't presume to have all the answers to them, but they are the right questions to be asking. All right, so that's what he wrote. Now, what's the takeaway from all of that? Almost lost my camera there. What's the takeaway from that? My thoughts on this are, yeah, there are big difference between natural consequences and artificial consequences. If you say stuff that people don't want to hear, they don't like it, and, that happens to mean that a lot of people are now not going to like you because you say things they don't want to hear, that's kind of a natural consequence. You can't really control whether somebody likes you or not. Now, an artificial consequence, in my estimation, is pushing to have someone removed or deplatformed from something because they say things you don't agree with and you don't like them, so you don't want them to be able to say those things anymore, and you want to punish them and try and you're trying to force conformity upon somebody to come around to your way of thinking rather than challenge the ideas themselves. And in the short term, you may think that works, but in long term, all you're doing is driving those ideas underground where they can fester. The truth is, we all have our thoughts on things. We all have our positions on things. And I think the only way you might have someone come around to change their way of thinking, or maybe not say those things that you disagree with, is by challenging those ideas and maybe offering them a different perspective on it. Does that mean they'll change their mind? No. And even if they don't change their mind, you should still want them to be able to be on there, on the platform. Because the truth is, you're going to say things people don't like too. And you would expect to be able to stay on there saying those things. You would want to not be deplatformed, so why would you want that to happen to someone else? So anyways, that's going to be all for this video. I want to thank you for watching, and if you did enjoy this video, I would ask that you please like and subscribe to my channel. I will work on getting some more content out soon, and I hope to see you guys later. Thanks, guys.